Welcome back to the Customer Success Festival. Before we get going with the next helping of inspiring content, we'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsors for helping us bring this event to your screens. And don't forget, you can access even more content to elevate your CS knowledge by becoming a CSC member. Simply head on over to our website to find out more. Now sit back and enjoy the next session. Hello everyone and welcome back to the Customer Success Festival. So today we're joined by Nick, who's actually the CEO and co-founder of a company called Matic, and he's got a really great presentation lined up for you guys. Before we get going though, I'd like to invite everyone tuning in today to let us know where you're joining in from, and also Nick will be hosting a live Q&A at the end of the session, so make sure to pop your questions in the chat and we'll get around to those. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to Nick.
Awesome. Let me share my screen here and get going. All right. Well, excited to be here today. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Nick Meach, and I'm one of the co-founders of Matic.io. And what we do just at a high level is we automate the generation of data-driven content. So things like quarterly business reviews, renewal decks, ROI decks, anything that takes a lot of time to put together, we help automate. And it's as simple as you tell who it's for, and then basically we will go ahead and query your data sources, whether it's a CRM, a data warehouse, and we'll go ahead and put together a personalized, customized presentation in PowerPoint or Google Slides. So excited to be here today to chat about how you can be using data to be building trust with your customers. And so to maybe start with, let's maybe start with just what is data-driven content, right? And why is it important? So basically, just at a high level, the way that we define it is taking data, turning it into insights that then hopefully highlight some sort of insight that you can share with your customers, right? And I think I saw this actually when I was at LinkedIn prior to starting Matic. I was in an insights role. We had built internal tools and narratives that our customer success and sales teams would use to help drive better business outcomes, right? Whether it was acquisition, whether it was lowering churn, right? Increasing adoption. We saw the impact that these data-driven insights and this data-driven content had on those business outcomes. I think in today's climate, right, economic climate, the need to show value is extremely important. I think the emphasis now, especially when we talk to organizations and when we hear from the market, is customer success is now the focal point. Retaining customers and expanding customer is really the main driver of growth. And so in order to do that, how can you leverage data to build that trust, which then in turn hopefully leads to those better business outcomes, right? And the hope is that we're able to use data to show value of your product or service. So what we've got today is we want to show you how to create that data-driven content. So we've created 4 easy steps to do that. Step 1 is defining that customer journey. So those are like, what are the touch points in that customer journey that you want to use data-driven content in? From there, we'll talk about the story that you want to tell within those touch points. And then my favorite part of the process, which is what is the data that you need in order to bring that story to life, right? And then last but not least, I'll touch a little bit upon scale, right? So basically, how do I scale this out to my org and how do I make it as efficient as possible? Great. So first step, defining that the customer journey. Let's jump into that. The example that I'm about to give here is it is an example. You may already have something in place. Actually, I'm pretty confident that probably your marketing org or your ops team probably has defined this already, right? And so this is just an example, but usually you have like the contract start. So they sign a contract, your customers, or for your product or service. From there, you have the onboarding phase, right? You talk about timelines, you talk about what the onboarding process is to get them to value. And then adoption, right? How do we increase usage? How do we increase adoption? Coming into then what would then be a renewal, right? Showing some sort of renewal. And then last but not least, how do we expand the customer? So again, this is just an example of a customer journey. You may have different touch points, but it's good to outline what those touch points are, because then that's going to dictate the type of data-driven content you share with your customers. So next up, talking a little bit about the story that you want to tell, right? So we've identified the touch points in which we want to share some data-driven content. Now let's figure out what the story is that we want to tell. And a few things to consider when you are creating the story. The first one is, I know it sounds really, really obvious, but you'd be surprised. Keep your customer in mind, right? At the end of the day, we want to make sure that you are, reiterating like what is most important to them, right? Why did they purchase your product or your service to begin with? What were their objectives? What are their OKRs, right? And how can we help them achieve that? So always keep your customers in the back of your minds when you're creating these outlines for these touch points. The second one is we kind of view narratives as building blocks, right? They should build upon one another. So when you put together some content in the onboarding phase, right, you're talking about what they purchased, what the timeline is going to be for onboarding, what are the KPIs you're going to be tracking, right? But then when you talk about data in the adoption phase, you're going to reiterate those KPIs, and hopefully that the narrative is kind of building upon itself. And then the third one is, I think is probably the most important, is getting feedback, right? Don't create these narratives and these outlines in a vacuum, whether it is going to other folks on your team, right, to get feedback. Hey, what do you guys think about this outline? What have you shared with customers? As well as external feedback, right? I think we all have a few favorite customers that are willing to provide feedback. So share maybe the outline with them, get their take on it before you finalize the narrative. Great. So I think the next step in the process, which I would say is probably the most important, is really identifying the data that you need to bring the story to life. And I think this is always also a little bit the challenging part of it as well. And so before we jump in, let's maybe talk a little bit about the different types of data, right? I think everybody's heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Kind of put a spin on it. This is the hierarchy of data. And at the bottom of the pyramid, you have account data, right? This could be anything from like what they've purchased, some data around the account, like what industry in, what segment they're in, like who the champions are. So anything around the account. Next up in the pyramid, you've got a bucket of data, which is like usage data, right? Like how are they using your product or service? How often, right? This could be at the user level. This could be an aggregate. You may have a suite of products. So how are they using product A, B, or C that they've purchased? So basically anything that show usage and adoption. And then last but not least is ROI, right? Like we want, and this is the pinnacle of it, you want to be able to show how the usage data translates to ROI and value. Again, we want to go back to why they purchased the product to begin with. So the hope is to be able to show that value so that they do renew or they do expand with your product or service. And so going back to the different touch points that we identified in the customer journey, right? I kind of highlight a little bit some of the data that you could be using across those touch points. So in the onboarding phase, right, it's going to be probably more qualitative data that you've gathered in the discovery process and the pre-sale motion. So like what are the objectives and goals of the customer? right? Like, what did they purchase? What are the timelines to get them onboarded? This is the type of data that you'll be kind of sharing in that onboarding phase. I would say in the adoption phase is where you're going to be using a lot of that usage data, right? So again, this could be at the user level. You may want to highlight certain user groups, as well as at the account level in aggregate. Like, how is usage trending over time? Are there certain features within the product that are lacking, that haven't been used, that you should use, that could unlock value, right? You want to use that usage data in this step. And then in the renewal, this is really where we want to talk about ROI, right? Again, we want to translate the usage data that you've showcased throughout the different touch points. Again, you want the narratives to build upon themselves. So reiterating the usage that we talked about in the adoption phase, and then translating that into ROI that hopefully ties to the objectives that you talked about in the onboarding phase, right? Of why they purchased your product to begin with. And then last but not least, which we didn't touch in the pyramid, which is kind of benchmarking, right? If we want to expand, how do we want to show the customer how they're doing? And I would argue that benchmarking is something that you could even use at the renewal phase as well as the adoption phase. A lot of people now, you don't want to just show data for the sake of showing data, but you want to give them some sort of comparison, right? So the benchmarking could be time-based, hey, quarter of a quarter. It could also be at the account level to show, hey, here's your usage data compared to other customers that look like you. Here's you're doing well. Here are the areas that you're not doing well. Let's put a plan together to drive adoption and then hopefully lead to expansion. And so the next few slides here that I'll highlight are actually some examples, right? So these are example slides or example content. We love executive summaries. This is something, it's a great way based on the audience that you're presenting to, whether it could be a decision maker, could be the economic buyer, or even a champion, highlighting the executive summary and just pinpointing, 3 to 6 key data points that you really want them to get out of it is great. And here's a great layout that they can go ahead and consume, right? Here's another shortened version of that. This could be something that you do in the onboarding phase, right? Here's how many licenses you've purchased if you're a license model, right? Here's how many users you've onboarded thus far, right? And then this is maybe the last bucket could be like active users. Like, here's how many of those onboarded users are active, right? And like, again, it's really simple, pretty streamlined, but a great way for you to be able to visualize this in a concise way to the stakeholder that you're presenting to. And then here's maybe something that you can share in a slide that could be formatted for the usage or the adoption phase, right? Some usage data. We love showing some sort of graph, usually over time, right? Keep it simple. You'd be surprised. People, there's a ton of visualizations out there, but at the end of the day, what people understand are simple visualizations like line charts, bar charts, donut charts. I come from a data background, and I love me some crazy advanced visualizations, but it's very hard to explain like a spider chart or a Sankey chart to a customer. So key takeaway here is keep it simple. And then again, off to the right-hand side, what are the takeaways, right, that you want your customer to get out of that, out of the usage data? Here's another, this is a great benchmarking visual, right? So a table that you can highlight of 3 core KPIs, right? KPI 1, 2, and 3, and then from there, highlight what is their usage and then compare to a particular segment, right? So it could be industry, it could be company size, or it could just be your customer base in aggregate, right? And then having some sort of iconography, red, yellow, green, as to are they doing well, are they not doing well? And lastly, here's a great example of just like ROI, right? You've got some donut charts here. What is the key KPI that you want to showcase here? And then off to the right-hand side, maybe some bullet points on takeaways that tie to that return on investment that you really want to highlight for the customer. Awesome. So the last step in the process of creating that data-driven content is going to be scale, right? And this is really more about how to scale that content to your teams. And a few things just to keep in mind as you're scaling. I think the first one is, again, you don't want to just dump data. You want to turn that data into insights, but you want to make sure that it is accurate and you don't want to lose that credibility with your customer. So whatever you put together, you want to make sure that there is a level of like QA before you share with your customer, especially if they have access to that same data via your product. You want to make sure that what you're presenting to them ties out and it is accurate. I think we've all been in situations where you share something with a customer a previous quarter or previous month, and then you come back and you pull the data again, it might not match up, and then it becomes a sticky situation and trying to justify like what's going on with the data. So always try to do some sort of QA before presenting, right? And hopefully in an automated fashion. And the second is feedback loops. And this is something that I've reiterated throughout the talk today, is make sure that you are getting those feedback loops, whether it is from your team as well as the customers that you're talking to. Narratives and content is kind of similar to building software, right? Your teams that are building the software are not just shipping and then saying, hey, we're done, we're not going to be making any enhancements. They're constantly tweaking and iterating, and content should be viewed in a very, very similar light, right? We should be launching something, hey, and then get feedback from your teams, like what slides are working or what content is working, and then make those changes accordingly. And then last but not least is distribution, right? Like how do you distribute this content? And there's a lot of channels, right? You want to meet your customers where they're at. This could be a meeting, right, over Zoom. This could be via email, Slack, or Teams, right? Like those are popular channels in which you can kind of distribute some of the stuff. But think about how you want to distribute this content, and also how you want to distribute the data for your teams, right? Whether it is through a dashboard, whether it is through a person. Try to figure out how you distribute that accordingly. And so just to kind of recap, the 4 steps here in creating this data-driven content. Again, start with the customer journey. Specifically, start with the touch points within the journey, right? Whether you have an onboarding phase, adoption, renewal, expansion, whatever those touch points are, figure out that first, then figure out the story that you want to tell within those touch points. We talked a little bit about the data. I think we spent a lot of time here. What is the data that you need to bring that story to life? And then last but not least, how do you scale that, right? So from making sure the data is accurate, so having QA in place, talking about feedback loops, how are you constantly improving on these narratives and this content? And then last but not least, how you distribute it, right? What is the best way for you to distribute, whether it is through the CSMs, whether it's through email, whether it's through Slack? How do you want to go ahead and distribute this content? And so last but not least, to kind of close out, we talked a lot about data-driven content. So if you do want an example, scan the QR code here and we'll send you a template that you can use as inspiration within PowerPoint or Google Slides. So hopefully that'll kind of give you an overview of what you could be using within your organizations to better build trust with your customers through this data-driven content. So we'll open it up to questions. If anybody has anything, would love to jump in and answer anything that's top of mind.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that presentation, Nick. I'd like to open up the floor to some questions while we've got some time. So we've got a question here from Ernie. When you increase your amount of customers, your chances of churn increase simultaneously, which can be difficult to explain to your key internal stakeholders. What advice can you give to CS leaders when confronted with this issue of scalability?
Yeah, I mean, I think specifically there, I think being transparent and honest, right? Like you want to identify what the root cause is. And so I think that is the first take. Be transparent, identify what the problem is. And then at the end of the day, you want it to be collaboration. You want to bring your stakeholders along the journey and have them be an input into what the solution is, right? So that's something that I would definitely focus on.
Definitely. Great answer. Another question here. What are some key KPIs to measure the success of a CS function?
Well, I think that the big one here is always going to be net dollar retention, right? It also kind of depends on how your organization is structured, right? So if you are in charge of the renewal or you guys are tied to a number, then obviously that's going to be something you're going to track. But net dollar retention, gross dollar retention, like those are probably what's top of mind to every CS org right now. Is how are we ensuring that our existing customer base is not detracting, right? So for those of you who don't know, anything above 100% means that you are keeping your customers, but they're also expanding. If it's below 100%, you've got a leaky bucket, right? That means that you are basically churning customers without bringing anything in.
Appreciate that. Another question here. How do you measure trust?
Well, I think trust ultimately can is going to go down to the bottom line, right? Like if customers are expanding, renewing, that means that you've built a partnership, you've built that trust with them. I think some other metrics that you can measure, NPS is a great way. I think one of the things that always surprises me, we always track NPS for products. You could probably have an NPS score of your CSMs, right? So identify the stakeholders that they work with and send out a quick survey to see like, hey, how have we been helping you guys accomplish your goals and objectives? And so some sort of an NPS score is a great way to be able to measure that.
Thank you so much. Hopefully that answered your question there, Tim. Yeah, we've also added Nick's LinkedIn in the chat, so make sure to go over and connect with him there to continue the discussion. We've got another question here. We just did a client-based wide, well, it's not a question, it's a statement. We just did a client-based wide NPS.
Yeah, I think
Yes,
NPS scores are really, really great to be able to even measure trust and also just overall satisfaction, right?
for sure, yeah. Yeah, some really positive feedback here, Nick. Again, if anyone's got any more questions, we've got a couple minutes to answer your questions, guys. And again, head over to our Slack channel as well to continue the discussion. And of course, connect with Nick on LinkedIn. I'm sure he'd be more than happy to answer your questions over there. Yeah, is there anything else you'd like to add while we wait here for a couple minutes?
No, definitely. If you do have any questions, let us know. Feel free to reach out. I think there's one more that just came in. How to use data to engage with disengaged customers. Actually, this is probably one of my favorites. I think a lot of customer success managers are scared to show bad data, right? Like if they're not adopting or if they're not, and if you show it in the right time, like you don't want to show it obviously prior to a renewal, but if you're setting that up at the beginning, then I would argue it's probably a good time to show that, right? So in the adoption phase, if you're saying, hey, no one's adopting the product or service, share that with your stakeholder and see like, hey, what's the plan that we can put together to increase adoption? Is it training? Is there something with the product in particular that we didn't think about? But it's all about, I think, being transparent with your customer and early on, I think will help lead to moving your disengaged customers to engaged customers, as well as you might not have a meeting on the books, but if they're not replying to your email, send out a one pager, right? Send
Yeah,
out something as a nugget, right? And then hopefully they see the one pager that you've put together and they're like, wow, I didn't know that we were experiencing this ROI, or I didn't know our team was using the product in this way. Hey, Nick, let's jump on a call to see how we can expand this use case within our organization. So that's a great way to be able to engage with disengaged customers.
definitely some really great strategies there. Another one here. How do you deliver bad news to customers?
Yeah, I mean, going back to earlier, this is a tough one. I think, if you only deliver good things, I think customers can, read through it. I think
Yeah,
sometimes when you deliver bad things, it's a way to build trust, right? And so you're being honest, you're being transparent, and I think customers will respect that. So again, I think it's all about timing. Don't wait until the last minute to deliver bad news. So if it is around usage and you've got a renewal coming up, don't wait until the last minute to talk about it. Be proactive and
yeah,
do
yeah.
that months beforehand, right?
Yeah, that
Yeah,
makes a lot of sense. Be transparent and then just nip it in the bud. Best way to approach it. Only positive reads are dishonest to me.
I totally agree. I mean, that's exactly. I think people know that everything can't be perfect, right? And so giving some bad news and at least providing a solution, right? You can deliver
Yeah,
bad news if you are able to say, hey, we see this, we acknowledge it, but here's how we're going to turn it around. I think that's a great way to be able to turn a negative into a positive.
yeah, definitely. Another question here from Kevin Fong. How early do you talk about an annual renewal?
um, I would say this is where really understanding what the budget cycle is at your customers is really important, right? So you should definitely try to align that discussion around the budget. But again, going back to like the narratives should be building, they're like building blocks that should be building upon themselves. If you are doing that adoption review, that QBR at the 6 month mark, definitely bring it up. I would say you shouldn't bring up a renewal, the month of, like at least 3 months before. You should be talking about it. But again, the narrative should be building upon themselves. So anytime you do talk about it, hey, FYI, renewals 6 months away, 5 months away, 4 months away. That way they can budget accordingly.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Nick. If anyone's got any more questions, we'll wait a few more seconds. But if not, like I said, head on over to our Slack channel, continue the discussion there. Also connect with Nick on LinkedIn. But again, Nick, that was a pleasure. Really great presentation. Hopefully, our audience enjoyed that as well.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Really enjoyed the chat and the conversation.
Well, we've got some more questions coming in, so we may as well
Uh,
tackle those. So
okay.
question here from Bayron. Any data/analytic tool you could recommend?
So for BI tools, it really depends. I would say the leaders are definitely like Tableau and Looker are probably the big BI tools that a lot of folks use, as well as Mode. We use Mode at Matic for our
Yeah,
BI tool, and we think that they're great. Obviously, we also are somewhat of an analytics tool, so we're not a BI tool, but we can help you guys automate that process. But I would say for dashboarding, Mode, Looker, and Tableau are probably the top three.
amazing. Another question here from Karina. Have you ever used customer effort score to monitor the overall ease of use of the product? Any tips on what the triggers should be to trigger that service?
When you mean by customer effort scores, it's just like customer satisfaction or effort in the sense of like, yeah, I guess I've never heard of it being used as customer effort.
Yeah, could you maybe expand on that a little bit, Karina? But yeah, everyone seems to be enjoying the discussion so far. Yeah, a
Okay. So,
metric of satisfaction in using a product as established by one or more individuals.
okay. Yeah, so it seems like it's very similar to MPS, right? So ideally, you're probably going to bucket the scores, right, into certain categories like low, medium, high. And what I've seen work really, really well is having some sort of playbook for each category, right? So if it's a low score, right, what is that playbook that needs to happen? Do we need to get on a call with the decision maker? Do we need to get a call with the end users, whatever it may be, right? And those tasks and that playbook is probably going to differ for each category.
Definitely. Thank you so much. That sort of brings us perfectly on time. So hopefully everyone enjoyed it. And make sure to tune into the following sessions for the rest of the festival. But again, thank you so much to Nick. It was a pleasure.
Awesome. Thank you so much, team. Have a good one.
Pleasure. Cheers, guys.